So it's Halloween. And I couldn't resist. I actually looked it up. The next time Halloween is going to be on Sunday is 2021. So I decided I better not wait around for another chance. And it's funny because, Halloween, now they say, is the second biggest holiday in terms of the amount of stuff that people buy and do. Halloween parties aren't just for little kids anymore. It's a whole thing, And last night when we had trick-or-treaters coming around, I learned that once you were a teenager, you were supposed to give up trick-or-treating. You were too dignified for that. That obviously wasn't the rule here now, last night. I think the 50-year-old guy who knocked on the door was pushing a little bit, but we even gave him some candy. I'm not kidding. So Halloween is such a big deal. When we had the worship committee meeting last, I said, Halloween's on a Sunday. And just kind of as a joke, I said, maybe we should decorate. And everyone said, oh, you think so? So we didn't do that. We decided not to go with the bats and cobwebs. And this church is already, kind of Gothic looking to start with. So we felt like we didn't really need to. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Halloween and how much of a time it is for being scared. And how strange that is, if you think about it. That people love the haunted houses, the scary movies, the attractions. We went to Kings Island and went through all the haunted houses, as many as we could. And people just love it, flock to it. People like being scared. People in our society are paying money to be scared. And if you think about it, that desire to be scared kind of goes back a long way. I don't know if anybody remembers playing Bloody Mary. That's where you look in a mirror and you say Bloody Mary 3 times, and maybe she comes after you if you do. She's like an evil ghost type person. There's a comment on why young children think it's a good idea to have a killer ghost come after them is not entirely clear. But of course she never does. And long before that, people were telling stories around campfires and scaring each other. Probably when fires weren't campfires, but just the place where you were to stay warm at night. People have been telling scary stories. And yet today it's more and more and more popular. And we work harder and harder to find ways to be scared. And maybe the reason is because there's not that much really scary going on. Which might be odd. But we are safer and more secure than just about anybody who has ever lived. And as worked up as we get about the things that are threatening in different ways, the fact is, we Americans are among the very fewest people anywhere in the world, even today, if you think about it, who have never lived through a time when an army invaded and knocked down our cities or our places to live. Where no one in living memory remembers what it's like to have an epidemic where thousands of people are dying. Or, like I said, an invasion, where we can assume that our kids are going to grow up most of the time. Where we can be faced with less uncertainty and less danger than at almost any time in history. This is a picture of London. This isn't that long ago. Many of you here can remember that. And I thought about that because I read an interview as I was doing some research by one of the guys who makes these scary movies, these gory movies. He doesn't just do scary. He's one of these bloody guts directors, And they asked him, well, why did you start making all these movies? And some of his movies aren't even that frightening, but he just throws a lot of gore around. And he says, well, I'm Dutch, and I'm 75. And they're like, well, what does that mean? And he says, well, when I was a kid, I lived next to a weapons factory. It got bombed by the Allies, every few weeks, and sometimes planes would get shot down. He said all this violence and explosions and dead bodies and all that, that's just what I grew up with. It's not strange to me. That was just part of normal life. And maybe it's because we haven't had that experience for the most part, that we are drawn more and more to scary movies, to things that frighten us artificially, because we don't have that experience of being afraid. You know, when you go to a scary movie, if you do, you come out, and people don't usually go alone. Very few people watch a horror movie by themselves. Sometimes couples go, young couples, going out on a first date or a second date. A lot of times groups of kids will go. And when you come out, you feel like you got through something. We know that tragedy bonds people together far better than easy times. That the times when people really come together are the times when they're under threat. Even if you think about your family, or if you think about our country, the times when everybody really got on the same page and started working together were the times that were frightening. I'm not talking about like frightening like there's economic trouble. I'm talking about like people are attacking us, right? We all have different moments like that in our personal history. And it's those times when there's real threat that people get over all the stuff that they bicker about and really come together. And so I think that part of the reason we're drawn to scary movies is it brings us together and helps us overcome our fear of the things that are frightening around us. But we don't need to go to scary movies. You know, we could know that we don't need to worry about anything. And this is what Paul says, and he puts it very, very clearly. And this translation brought that out. Not trouble, not hard times, not hatred, not hunger, not homelessness, not bullying threats, not even the worst sins listed in Scripture. They kill us in cold blood because they hate you. We're sitting ducks. They pick us off one by one. Paul says none of this phases us. Now, you know, I like the way he says that none of this phases us. He kind of says, we know better, don't we? Well, we're supposed to know better. None of this is supposed to faze us. None of the threats or the fears or the ups and downs of the world, even the very grave dangers. You know, when Paul lived, after he wrote this letter about 20 years later, the Romans came through Jerusalem, through Israel, through the land that Jesus and all his disciples were from, and they just burned it all to the ground. You know, that's danger. The kinds of threats we face don't come anywhere close to that. And yet even then, in that time of uncertainty, Paul says you don't have to worry about anything. He doesn't say you don't have to, he just takes it as a fact. None of this phases us. Can we say the same thing? We're supposed to be able to. We can. None of it phases us. Doesn't bother us. No big deal. Now, of course, we're going to have that feeling in there. And that's kind of the deeper point. You know, if you look at horror movies, every one of the monsters is about us. If you think about Frankenstein and the monster, that's really a warning about arrogance and the belief that we have the power to control more things than we can control. And what goes wrong when people get arrogant about our control of the world. Ghost stories, even I was thinking about Freddy Krueger, those stories are about the secrets and the bad things we've done in the past that we try to hide and keep in the closet. Even the phrase skeleton in the closet touches on that.